So, Terry Wynn Yates, you're telling me that even an amateur could break into this with a lockpick?
You don't have to break anything. There's several methods to open that lock. It's extremely easy to pick open, extremely easy. And that's what we start our beginners with. And within the hour, they're picking that lock.
For 52 days, one detail about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has been repeated so often by so many people that it became accepted as fact without anyone seriously questioning it. The security gate on Nancy Guthrie's front door was impenetrable. Nobody could break through it from the outside. It was heavy iron. It required a key. The only way to get past it was from the inside, which meant, according to the theory that dominated weeks of coverage, that someone had to have already been inside the house before the suspect on the doorbell camera ever appeared on that porch. That detail changed everything about how people understood this crime. It shaped the accomplice theory. It drove speculation about who might have had a key, who might have had access, who might have been waiting inside before Nancy even came home that night. It was the architectural fact at the center of the case. It was also wrong. On a recent episode of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, a third-generation master locksmith with more than 25 years of professional experience sat down and explained, in clear and direct terms, what that security gate actually represented from a technical standpoint. His name is Terry Wynn Yates. He goes by Mr. Locksmith. He has 25 years of professional experience working with locks of every type, from simple residential hardware to high-security commercial systems. He is not a theorist. He is not a true crime analyst. He is someone who has spent his professional life understanding exactly what locks can and cannot do. And he had something very specific to say about the lock on Nancy Guthrie's security gate. So, an amateur could open that lock in minutes, Wynn Yates said. A professional in seconds. Let that sit for a moment. An amateur in minutes. A professional in seconds. The top deadbolt and the bottom key knob visible on Nancy's iron security gate are, according to Wynn Yates, exactly the type of locks that beginner locksmiths learn to pick first. They are standard residential hardware. There is nothing special about them. There is nothing reinforced about them. The iron gate itself may be sturdy and heavy, but the lock mechanism inside it is the same basic 5-pin tumbler that you will find on millions of front doors across America. And 5-pin tumbler locks, Wynn Yates explained, are where every locksmith trainee begins. In training programs, he said, beginners are picking locks just like this within an hour of starting. So now understanding why requires understanding how these locks work at a basic level. A standard pin tumbler lock contains a series of spring-loaded pins of varying heights inside a cylindrical plug. When the correct key is inserted, the ridges on the key push each pin to exactly the right height, aligning what locksmiths call the shear line, the point at which the plug can rotate freely and the lock can open. Without the right key, the pins block the rotation and the lock stays shut. Picking the lock means manipulating those pins manually, without a key, until they all align at the shear line at the same time. It sounds difficult. In practice, on a standard residential lock, it is not. Wynn Yates described two primary methods used by both professionals and amateurs. The first is raking, where you insert a tension wrench into the bottom of the keyhole and apply slight rotational pressure, creating a very small amount of tension on the pins. Then you insert a pick, a thin metal tool with a curved or serrated tip, and move it in and out while applying that tension. The movement rocks the pins up and down. Some of them will set at the shear line while tension is being applied. Others won't. You keep raking until enough pins have set that the lock opens. It is imprecise but fast. On standard hardware, a practiced amateur can open a lock this way in under 2 minutes. An experienced professional can do it in under 30 seconds. The second method is single pin picking. More precise, more deliberate, quieter. You identify each of the 5 pins individually, manipulate each one to the shear line while maintaining tension, and set them one at a time. It takes more skill and more time per lock, but the technique is more reliable and produces less noise than raking. It is the method a professional would use when silence matters. And then there is the lockpick gun, the device that Nancy Grace described in the interview. A lockpick gun is a spring-loaded tool with a small flat pick at its tip. When you squeeze the trigger, the pick vibrates rapidly inside the keyhole, bouncing against all the pins simultaneously and rapidly. You apply turning pressure with a tension wrench at the same time. The vibration from the pick causes the pins to jump up and down, and when they momentarily align at the shear line, the tension from the wrench rotates the plug and the lock opens. It is effectively an automated version of the raking technique. Faster, requires less skill, more mechanical. Lockpick guns are legal to own in most states. They are widely available online. A basic model costs between $20 and $40. A person who has never picked a lock in their life can learn to use one successfully in an hour or two of practice. Wynn Yates noted that the lockpick gun is considered somewhat old school by professional locksmiths. There are more elegant and reliable methods. But its primary disadvantage is noise. The click, click, click of the vibrating pick mechanism is audible. On a quiet street at 2 a.m., with no other ambient noise, it might be heard. Which is why a professional doing this quietly would prefer manual picking. And a professional, as Win Yates made clear, can open this kind of lock in seconds with manual technique. All of which means that the claim which has circulated throughout this investigation, that the gate was impenetrable from the outside, was not accurate. The gate's iron frame may be strong, the bolts holding it to the door frame may be solid, but the lock controlling access through that gate is standard residential hardware. It is not a high-security mechanism. It was not designed to resist someone who knows how to pick it. And the person who entered Nancy Guthrie's property on the night of February 1st, 2026, for the purpose of taking her, clearly did not improvise. They came prepared. They came with specific tools. The question of whether one of those tools was a lockpick is now open in a way it was not before. When Nancy Grace asked Win Yates directly whether all the coverage describing the gate as impossible to breach was accurate, his response was unambiguous. Totally false, he said. This is important. Not because it disproves any particular theory about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. No one has been charged. No suspect has been publicly identified. The investigation continues, and the truth of what happened on the night of February 1st is still unknown. But because one of the central factual assumptions that has guided weeks of public analysis of this case turns out to be incorrect, and that changes what is and is not possible in terms of how entry was made. Before we go any further, the essential facts that need to be stated clearly. Nancy Guthrie's family has been officially cleared by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Her daughters, her son-in-law, every member of her immediate family are cleared. They are not suspects. They are people enduring an unimaginable ordeal, and they deserve compassion, not suspicion. Everything in this video is based on publicly available reporting, expert analysis from named professionals, and verified statements by law enforcement officials. No one is being accused of any crime. If you have any information about this case, please contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-255-324. You can submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of NBC Today show anchor Savannah Guthrie. She has been missing since the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026, from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. Once she has a pacemaker, she requires daily medications. She has not been seen or heard from in 52 days. She sent Christmas cards to her neighbors. She waved at people walking dogs on Camino Real. She was a warm and present member of a community that has since organized vigils, covered her street in yellow flowers, and watched as the investigation reached 52 days without an arrest. That community deserves to understand what actually happened to the assumptions that shaped this investigation from the beginning. Not because understanding changes the fact that Nancy is still missing. Not because correcting the record brings her home, but because an investigation this important, this public, and this dependent on community tips and public attention should be built on accurate information. And the claim that the security gate was impenetrable was not accurate. The people of the Catalina Foothills who sent Christmas cards back to Nancy, who waved at her on the same street where she waved at them, who organized the neighborhood watch discussions and helped gather footage for investigators, who still drive past that yellow flower memorial every day, they have been living with a version of this crime that was partly built on a false assumption. They believed, because they were told, that only someone with a key or someone already inside could have gotten through that gate. That is not true, and the difference matters. 52 days. Now let's talk about what we actually know about the night she disappeared and why the locksmith's revelation changes the picture in ways that most of the coverage has not yet examined. At 9:48 p.m. on January 31st, Nancy's garage door opened. 2 minutes later, it closed. She was safely inside her home, settled in for the night. 4 hours passed. At 1:32 a.m. on February 1st, a figure appeared on Nancy's Nest doorbell camera. Ski mask, thick gloves, a holster positioned at the front of his waist, a backpack already full, not empty to be filled with stolen items, but already loaded with whatever he brought. He spent 15 minutes on the porch, moving in strange and indecisive patterns, appearing to work on the camera mechanism. At 1:47 a.m., the camera went dark. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from its monitoring app. And at 2:36 a.m., a vehicle was captured on a neighbor's Ring camera, approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home. 8 minutes, 2.5 miles. When family members arrived the following morning after Nancy didn't show up for her church service, they found blood on the front porch. Nancy's purse was inside, her wallet, her phone, her car was in the garage. Everything she would need to go anywhere voluntarily left behind. Everything except Nancy. For weeks, one of the central questions about that night was how the suspects gained entry to the house. The front door had the security gate. No signs of forced entry were found through the front. Neighbors described the gate as extremely sturdy, impossible to break through without specialized tools and significant noise. Law enforcement officials began exploring the theory that a second person had been inside the house before the abduction began. Someone who opened the gate from the inside to let the suspect in, or helped remove Nancy through the front. That theory is still possible. It has not been disproven by anything Terry Wynn Yates said. Multiple people could still have been involved. The evidence for a coordinated operation involving more than one person is substantial and remains relevant regardless of how the gate works. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed the blood pattern at the front porch and said it was consistent with Nancy being carried by two people, not walking on her own, the absence of footprints in or near the blood trail, the absence of what forensic experts call voids, gaps in a pattern where feet would have stepped, and the specific shape of the blood drops all pointed to someone being transported rather than walking. O'Connell said it directly. Two people carried her, a shoulder and her head tilted as they moved her. Former FBI hostage negotiator Chip Massey noted that the suspects were inside the house for 41 minutes, based on the timeline from the camera going dark to the pacemaker disconnecting. 41 minutes is far too long for a professional operation. Massey said it plainly. This was not a professional takedown. This was someone who did not know how to handle what was in front of them. And that assessment of 41 minutes of chaos inside the house, a struggle, blood, an 84-year-old woman who fought back hard enough to bleed, is entirely consistent with a crime that required more than one person to execute, even if execution was messy and amateur. Multiple retired FBI agents analyzing this case publicly have concluded that at minimum 2 people were involved based on the physical evidence. The logistics of disabling the camera, entering the property, controlling an 84-year-old woman who fought back, and moving her from the interior of the house to a vehicle 2.5 miles away in 8 minutes, all while leaving blood evidence and taking 41 minutes, points toward a divided operation where different people had different responsibilities. But what Wynn Yates's analysis does is remove the gate itself as the automatic proof that an accomplice had to have been inside already. If the lock could be opened from the outside by an amateur in minutes, then someone with even basic lockpicking knowledge and the right inexpensive tool could have entered through the front door without anyone already being inside to let them in. The gate being locked is no longer evidence of an inside accomplice. Actually, it could simply be evidence of someone who came prepared. Think about what that means for understanding the sequence of events. The suspect appears on camera at 1:32 a.m. He spends 15 minutes on the porch. In 15 minutes, with a lockpick gun purchased online, you can open the kind of lock on Nancy's gate. You can disable the camera. You can be inside and potentially back out again before the porch footage ends. If one person was managing the front, disabling the camera, dealing with the gate, while another was entering from the back, the 15 minutes on the porch could represent coordination rather than confusion. Or perhaps the gate was not even the primary entry point at all. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, analyzing this case publicly based on what investigators did after processing the scene, pointed to a different possibility. Coffindaffer noted that after investigators processed Nancy's home, they changed the locks on the back of the house, specifically the back entrance near the garage, not the front, not the sides. Investigators don't change specific locks without specific reason. They change them when they believe those entry points were compromised. The lock change at the back is a signal in the way that investigative actions often are. Something the investigators did that tells you, if you know how to read it, where they believe entry was made. Former FBI agent Steve Moore, analyzing this case through his conversations with Brian Enton on Brian Enton Investigates, made the connection explicitly. Well, he described how trained operatives, whether SWAT teams or criminals who have studied their target, approach entry to a property based on where the occupant is likely to be. If the bedroom is at the back of the house, you go in the front. If the bedroom is at the front, you go in the back. The goal is to enter from the direction farthest from the sleeping occupant to maximize your time inside before being detected. Nancy's bedroom, based on the layout described by investigators and neighbors, is toward the rear of the property. Under that logic, if you wanted to enter the house with the maximum chance of reaching her before she was awake and aware, you would enter from the front, through the gate, quietly with a lockpick. And if you wanted to exit with her, you could go out the back where a vehicle or a second person was waiting, away from the street and away from any cameras pointed at the front of the house. That scenario does not require an inside accomplice. It requires preparation, tools, knowledge of the property, and a lock that can be opened by someone who has practiced for a few hours with $40 worth of equipment from the internet. There is one more element from the Crime Stories broadcast that deserves careful attention. because it connects to both the lockpick revelation and the question of how many people were involved in removing Nancy from her home. During the analysis of the doorbell camera footage, the footage of the suspect on the porch, an observer identified what appears to be headlights visible in the background of the frame over the suspect's shoulder in the distance. Possible headlights from a vehicle, parked or moving on the street behind him. Brian Fitzgibbons, Director of Operations at USPA Nationwide Security and a former Marine who specializes in locating and extracting missing people in complex situations, examined the footage on Crime Stories and spoke to the logic of the operation. He was careful about the headlights. He did not assert definitively that what appears in the background is a vehicle waiting with an accomplice, but he said the overall logistics of the crime strongly suggest a second vehicle was present somewhere in the operation, someone waiting with transportation, positioned to move Nancy quickly once she was out of the house. The timeline makes that reading compelling. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected. At 2:36 a.m., a vehicle appeared on a neighbor's Ring camera 2.5 miles away. In 8 minutes to move a person from inside a house to a vehicle, secure them, and travel 2.5 miles through residential streets at 2 in the morning. That is achievable, but it is tight, especially given that the suspects had spent 41 minutes inside the house already, suggesting things did not go smoothly. A vehicle already in motion, already departing the area while Nancy was being loaded into a second car elsewhere nearby, would explain the timing more comfortably than a single vehicle that had to wait at the scene until she was loaded. Fitzgibbons put the minimum number of people involved at 2. 1 to enter the house and control Nancy, 1 to manage transportation. The blood evidence, the 41-minute timeline, the pacemaker disconnect, and the vehicle sighting. None of it fits a single person acting alone, only improvising in real time. It fits a coordinated effort by at least 2 people, with specific roles and specific responsibilities, who came to Nancy Street that night with a plan they had prepared for weeks, possibly since January 11th. That theory was reinforced by something that emerged from a neighbor interview conducted on the Crime Stories with Nancy Grace program. Jeff Leamy lives 4 houses from Nancy Guthrie on the same street. He has cooperated fully with investigators from the beginning, and he described something that had not been widely reported. A pathway behind the properties in that part of the Catalina foothills that has existed for years. It is a utility road for the local power company. It runs behind the homes on that street. It connects to a cul-de-sac. Years ago, according to neighbors who have lived in the area for decades, school children used to cut through that area to reach their school bus, moving from the streets behind, through the brush and desert scrub, through a portion of someone's property, and out to the cul-de-sac that abutted the rear yards of the homes on Nancy Street. Leamy said from his own back courtyard, through the dense desert brush of cactus and palo verde, you can see the top of Nancy's home, approximately 150 yards away. The vegetation is thick. At night in the dark, moving through it would be difficult, but not impossible for someone who had mapped it out, who had walked it before, who knew what was there and what was not. And here is the detail that made everything Leamy said more significant than it might otherwise appear. He said his dogs, normally sound sleepers, not the kind of animals that regularly want to go outside in the middle of the night, woke him up on 2 specific occasions that investigators have since asked about repeatedly. One was the night Nancy disappeared, February 1st, at approximately 1 a.m. or just after. The other was January 11th. January 11th, the date that has become one of the central questions in this entire investigation. His dogs uncharacteristically awake, wanting to go outside, on January 11th, on February 1st, on both dates. And when he reviewed his own security camera footage afterward, at the request of investigators who kept coming back to ask about those specific evenings, he found something else. 2 of his cameras were offline during the critical windows, not malfunctioning in any obvious way, just offline, not recording. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed on March 23rd in an interview with KOL News 13 in Tucson that January 11th is a date investigators believe something significant occurred. He said it directly. We do believe that something occurred on January 11th, and that's with the FBI's analysis of the equipment and digital stuff they've done. He also revealed for the first time publicly how January 11th came to investigators' attention in the first place. When the FBI reached out to Google for help recovering data from Nancy's Nest doorbell camera, Google examined what was retrievable and came back with an initial assessment. The surveillance image of the suspect, the one without the backpack, without the gun, without the holster, that image, Google told investigators, may have been from January 11th. That was where the date came from. Not from a witness, not from a neighbor's tip, from Google through digital forensic analysis of the Nest camera system itself. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz, who has been one of the most careful and reliable reporters covering this investigation, confirmed this account through her conversation with Nanos and reported it on the Today Show on March 23rd. She explained exactly what happened. The FBI was working with Google to try to recover footage from Nancy's Nest doorbell camera, which had no active subscription at the time of the abduction. During that technical recovery process, Google examined the images that could be retrieved and initially told investigators that the image of the suspect without equipment was believed to be from January 11th. That designation, January 11th, hush from Google, is what first drove investigators to begin asking neighbors for footage from that specific date. That is why neighbors were asked to check their Ring cameras for January 11th. That is why the Guthrie family included the date in their public appeal. That is why investigators came back to Jeff Leamy's home and reviewed his footage from that date with him directly. But here is the complication that Nanos also revealed. Google later backed off that assessment. The company told investigators it could not definitively confirm that the image was from January 11th or from any other specific date. Without a reliable timestamp embedded in the recovered metadata, without a mechanism to verify when specifically the image was captured, Google said it could not say with certainty when that particular image was taken. The retraction matters because it introduces genuine uncertainty into one of the central assumptions of the investigation. The image of the suspect without the backpack, the image that generated so much speculation about a prior visit, about reconnaissance, about someone coming to the house before the night they actually took Nancy, could be from January 11th. Or it could be from another date entirely, including potentially from a different time on the same night as the abduction, before the suspect put his equipment on. Nanos acknowledged this uncertainty. He said without timestamps, there is no way to say definitively whether the suspect with or without the backpack was at the house on January 11th. The inability of Google to confirm the date is a real limitation. And yet, and this is the critical point, Nanos said investigators still believe something happened on January 11th. Not because Google told them. Google retracted that. Not because of the image specifically. The image's date is uncertain. But because the FBI conducted its own independent digital analysis of the equipment and the evidence, separate from what Google provided, and that analysis supports the belief that something occurred on that date. What that independent FBI analysis showed, what specifically it indicates, Nanos would not say. It could be cell tower data placing a phone in the area that night. It could be digital forensic evidence from other devices or systems. It could be something found during the analysis of the Nest camera hardware itself. Whatever it is, it was not undermined by Google's retraction, also because it came from a different source. The belief that January 11th matters survived Google walking back its assessment. It survived because the FBI found something else, through their own analysis, that points to that date independently. Think about what this means in the context of the locksmith revelation and the security gate. If someone was at Nancy's home on January 11th, 3 weeks before the abduction, and if they were there without their equipment, as the image without the backpack suggests, then they were there in a different capacity. They were not there to act. They were there to observe, to learn, to test, to prepare. And if that person had a lockpick or a lockpick gun, January 11th would have been an ideal time to understand the lock on the security gate, to test it quietly, to know whether it would yield in seconds or require more time, to factor that into the plan for the night when they actually came back. A person planning a targeted crime in a residential neighborhood does not act on the first visit. They visit multiple times. They learn the property. They understand the entry points, the camera angles, the security measures. They identify which tools they will need and whether those tools are sufficient for the job. January 11th, 3 weeks before the abduction, with no equipment visible, is precisely when that reconnaissance would have happened. Jeff Leamy's dogs woke up on January 11th. His cameras went offline. He didn't know at the time that there was anything to report. He filed it away. He went back to bed. It was only weeks later, when investigators came to him repeatedly asking about specific dates, that he reviewed his footage and put the pieces together. He has shared everything with investigators. He said the FBI walked his yard with him, went through the scrub brush behind his property, assessed the utility road and the cut-through to the cul-de-sac that abuts the rear of the homes near Nancy's. They walked the terrain. They understood the pathway. And in reviewing that footage together with agents, Leamy made another observation that he described as unusual. On a Saturday evening, the specific date he did not give, but the context suggests it was in the period investigators were asking about, he and his wife noticed a vehicle they didn't recognize parked on Escalante Street, the road in front of Nancy's home. Not in a driveway, not in a designated spot. She parked along the side of the road, in a small gravel cutout approximately 50 yards from Nancy's property, in a spot where people sometimes park when they walk their dogs in the neighborhood. They noticed it. They weren't sure what it meant. They didn't call anyone. It was just a car, parked on a residential street. Nothing inherently suspicious. It's only in retrospect, with everything that has happened since February 1st, that a car parked in an unusual spot on a Saturday evening in January becomes the kind of detail that matters. He shared that information with investigators as well. There is one more piece of physical evidence from the Crime Stories broadcast that deserves careful attention, and it is the element that connects most directly to the question of how Nancy was removed from her property. Forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan, who has over 10,000 death investigations in his career and is the author of Blood Beneath My Feet, analyzed photographs and video footage of the area in front of Nancy Guthrie's home and identified something in the gravel near her front entrance that has received very little attention in mainstream coverage. Parallel tracks, ridges in the ground, two narrow lines running parallel to each other, consistent in direction and spacing, near the front entrance of the property. Morgan examined the geometry carefully. The key measurements he analyzed were the wheelbase, the distance between the two parallel tracks, and the width of the individual track marks themselves. The tracks were narrow, very narrow, not the width you would see from a standard wheelbarrow with large rubber tires. Not consistent with typical garden equipment. The gauge was tight, suggesting something with small diameter wheels or runners, a wheelchair, a small hand truck, a collapsible cart, some kind of device with narrow wheels designed to transport weight. Morgan raised a specific and significant question. Could those tracks represent the path along which Nancy was moved? Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell had already analyzed the blood evidence at the porch and concluded that Nancy was carried, that the pattern of blood drops with no void, no footprints, no movement trails consistent with someone walking, pointed to two people carrying her, her head tilting as she was moved. If Nancy was carried to a certain point near the entrance and then placed on a wheeled device to be transported the rest of the way to a waiting vehicle, once the blood evidence would end at the point where she was placed on the device, the wheel tracks would continue from there. The FBI attempted to make a forensic cast of those tracks. According to information that emerged from the Crime Stories reporting, that attempt failed. The ground in front of Nancy's home is gravel and aggregate material, the kind of surface that does not hold the shape of a cast. When casting material is poured into gravel, it pulls up the stones with it when it dries. You get a mass of rocks rather than a readable impression. Photography was the only viable technique for preserving whatever evidence those tracks might hold. Morgan also raised the contamination problem directly. When a crime scene is released, made accessible to family members, to neighbors, yes, to media, before all physical evidence has been documented and secured, it creates interpretive uncertainty that cannot be undone. Investigators, crime scene technicians, and response personnel moving equipment through the scene could themselves have created tracks that look like the ones in the photographs. Without certainty about when those tracks were made and by whom, their evidentiary value is limited. But if those tracks reflect what happened on the night Nancy was taken, if they are real, if they were made by the device used to transport her, they tell a story that connects directly to the locksmith's revelation about the gate. A person carrying an 84-year-old woman would not carry her far before needing assistance. A wheeled device positioned just inside or just outside the front gate would allow the suspects to move her from the interior of the house to a vehicle more efficiently, more quietly, and with less physical strain than carrying her the entire distance. The gate, if opened with a lockpick rather than a key, could be approached from the outside. The device could have been brought in. Nancy could have been placed on it and wheeled to a waiting vehicle without any accomplice needing a key. None of this is confirmed. These are observations, analyses, and questions raised by experts who are not part of the official investigation, working from publicly available photographs and footage. The FBI has not confirmed what those tracks represent or whether they are relevant to the case at all. But the convergence of the locksmith's analysis with the forensic expert's observation and the blood pattern evidence creates a coherent picture of how this crime might have been executed by people who came prepared. People who knew the property, knew the entry points, tested the locks in advance, and had the tools to move an 84-year-old woman from her home on a quiet residential street without making enough noise to wake the neighbors 4 houses away. Now let's bring together everything these details reveal about the security gate theory, because the picture they paint when combined is more specific than any of them individually. The lock on Nancy's security gate is not impenetrable. A master locksmith with 25 years of professional experience said explicitly it is the kind of lock beginners learn to pick within an hour. And the tools to open it are available to anyone online. A lockpick gun can do the job with minimal noise. An amateur with a few hours of practice could have opened that gate, entered the house, and relocked it behind them, all before the doorbell camera was disabled. The cameras in the neighborhood, including Jeff Leamy's, 4 houses away, were offline on both critical dates, January 11th and February 1st. not continuously offline, specifically offline during the relevant windows. Leamy's dogs, which do not normally get up in the middle of the night, woke up on both of those dates. A dog waking up at 1 a.m. on January 11th and again at approximately 1 a.m. on February 1st on the street where Nancy Guthrie lived is not something investigators dismiss. An unidentified vehicle was seen parked on Escalante Street on a Saturday evening in the period investigators are scrutinizing. There is a pathway behind the properties, a utility road connecting to a cul-de-sac, running through terrain that is navigable at night for someone who has studied it, that provides access to the rear of Nancy's property from a direction that would not be captured by any front-facing camera. And Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos said, on the record on March 23rd, that investigators believe something occurred on January 11th. That belief is based on the FBI's own digital analysis, not on what Google told them and then retracted, on the FBI's independent assessment of the equipment and the evidence. What occurred on January 11th? Nanos would not say. He said the data is significant. He said investigators are not giving up. He said they have good evidence. He said we have so much in front of us, and we believe we have good evidence in front of us. Will that dry up? Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Anything is possible, but we're not giving up. And then he said something else, something that Nancy Grace highlighted, and that has not received the attention it deserves. He addressed directly whoever is responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie. He did not address the public. He did not address the media. He addressed the perpetrator or perpetrators. And he said 4 words: just give her up. Let her go. Take her to a clinic, a hospital. Drop her off. Just let her go. That appeal is significant in ways that go beyond its face value. When law enforcement officials who believe a missing person is no longer alive do not typically make appeals to perpetrators to bring them to a hospital. The appeal to take Nancy to a medical facility to drop her off implies that Nanos believes, or at least holds open the possibility, that Nancy is still alive and that the people who have her could still end this by bringing her somewhere safe. That is not nothing. 52 days in, that appeal to take her to a hospital is the sheriff saying publicly, on record, that she may still be reachable, that she may still be findable, that the people who know where she is could still make a decision to end this in a way that does not end in their arrest. Former FBI agents analyzing this case have said repeatedly that the most likely way a case like this gets resolved at this stage is through someone who knows something deciding that the reward money, or the weight of what they know, or the fear of being caught when the investigation eventually closes in, is enough to make them speak. $1.2 million, $1 million from the family, $100,000 from the FBI, $100,000 from an anonymous donor. That is life-changing money for anyone who is sitting on information and trying to decide whether to stay quiet. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said it in plain terms. The most likely path to solving this case is someone close to whoever is responsible eventually deciding to talk. A girlfriend who noticed something unusual. A family member who put pieces together. A friend who was told something they weren't supposed to know. Someone in that circle who decides that $1.2 million in whatever deal is available for cooperation is worth more than loyalty to someone who took an 84-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night. Former FBI agent Steve Moore said it too. He noted that the only people who genuinely have knowledge of this crime are the people who committed it, which is why no one has come forward for the reward yet. Everyone culpable has reason to stay silent, but silence gets harder over time. Stress accumulates, relationships fracture, money runs out. The FBI doesn't stop, and eventually in cases like this, someone talks. The Guthrie family has made another public appeal in recent days. On March 21st, Savannah Guthrie and her family released a statement asking the Tucson community for renewed attention to the case. "We desperately ask this community for renewed attention to our mom's case," they wrote. "Please consult camera footage, journal notes, text messages, observations or conversations that in retrospect may hold significance. No detail is too small. It may be the key." The family specifically asked people to search their memories around 3 time periods: the evening of January 31st, the early morning hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. They are telling the public what investigators are asking them internally. They are saying, without saying it directly, that January 11th matters. That the evening of that specific Saturday 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared is something investigators need help understanding. Savannah Guthrie added her own words to that statement. She wrote simply, "Someone knows how to find our mom and bring her home." She is right. Someone does know. It might be the person who was there. It might be someone who was told. It might be someone who saw a vehicle parked on Escalante Street on a Saturday evening and filed it away as nothing important. It might be someone who noticed a person testing the lock on a security gate late at night and didn't quite understand what they were seeing. It might be someone who worked in the area, or drove through it, or delivered something to a nearby address, and saw something that they still haven't connected to a case they've been following on the news. The security gate that everyone called impenetrable was never impenetrable. The lock that was supposed to require an inside accomplice was something a beginner could open in minutes. The cameras in the neighborhood went offline on the 2 dates investigators consider most significant. A dog on Nancy Street woke up on January 11th and again on February 1st. An unidentified vehicle was seen parked near her home on a Saturday evening. Parallel tracks were found in the gravel in front of her home that forensic experts believe may indicate a wheeled device was used to transport her. A utility road runs behind the properties, connecting the rear of the neighborhood to a cul-de-sac, providing a pathway that is navigable at night for someone who prepared in advance. None of this tells us who did this. No one has been charged. Well, no suspect has been named. The investigation continues, and the truth of what happened on Camino Real in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026, remains unknown. But what these details together tell us is important. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was not someone who passed a house at random and decided to try their luck. This was planned, prepared, and executed by someone who understood the property, tested the security, and came back when the conditions were right, with tools, with timing, and with knowledge of the lock that was supposed to keep Nancy safe. A knowledge that, as of this investigation, investigators and the public are only now beginning to fully understand. And Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano said on March 23rd that investigators believe something occurred on January 11th. And that belief is based on the FBI's own independent digital analysis, not just on what Google initially told them. The investigation continues. The evidence is being processed. The task force is active. And then Nano said something that has not received the attention it deserves. He did not address the press. He did not address the public. He addressed whoever is holding Nancy Guthrie. Just give her up, let her go. Take her to a clinic, a hospital, drop her off, just let her go. Those words from a sitting sheriff 52 days into an investigation with no arrest are not the words of someone who has given up hope. They are not the words of someone who believes it is already too late. They are the words of someone who still believes that Nancy is reachable, that she can be brought somewhere safe, and that the people who have her could make a choice that ends this without the worst possible outcome. 52 days, she is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She requires daily medications. She is someone's mother. She is someone's grandmother. She waved at her neighbors. She sent Christmas cards every year. She had a dog once, and neighbors remember seeing her walk it through the same quiet streets she had lived on for decades. Someone walked past her house and studied it. Someone tested the lock she trusted to keep her safe. Someone came back prepared with the right tools on the right night at the right hour and made the worst possible use of everything they had learned. And somewhere, someone knows who that was. If you have any information about this case, about anything you saw in Camino Real or in the Catalina foothills on the evenings of January 11th, January 24th, or January 31st, please contact the FBI. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can also submit information at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million for information that helps bring Nancy home or identify those responsible. No details